Welcome back to Variant Quran. I'm Daniel Brubaker. If you would like to hear an interview with Ibn Warraq, stick around. We're going to have a conversation with him in a couple minutes. We said goodbye to him again this morning after having been a house guest at our home. And last night we recorded a short conversation. Unfortunately, I had intended to record more than one, but our time ran short. This channel is focused generally on the text of the Quran, its variants in its manuscripts, including corrections that exist in the manuscripts, some of which obviously are corrections of mistakes. But in a broader sense, I have interests in the larger issues surrounding this kind of discussion and the environment in which we move and have these discussions, and some of the cultural issues around the world that allow such conversations to happen, that allow such inquiry to take place, and so forth. And some of the things that you have seen unfolding over this past year as I've begun this channel are touched by these issues, and some of those matters we will be talking about with Ibn Warraq as well. The folks who are critical and highly skeptical, like Ibn Warraq, and I think I would probably place myself a little bit further along that continuum, are only a portion of our colleagues, all of whom I'm connected with, many of whom I'm connected with. And so as opportunities present, we will have conversations to represent a wide range of perspectives, theories, and approaches to the text and study of the Quran, of Islam's origins, and of Muhammad, and so forth. And so I just wanted to preface this conversation by that. I'm very, very happy to have had a friendship with our guest today for more than a decade, and he is a gentleman, a very kind and serious man, and widely read, and very dedicated to freedom of inquiry and to the pursuit of truth in these subjects and more broadly. The final thing I will say before we move on to our interview is that you can be on the lookout for more videos coming up in the next week, at least one more video this coming week. I do ask you to have a little bit of patience with me over the coming month or two, because I'm preparing for teaching a course and fulfilling some other commitments. I'm very, very thankful for you. I'm very, very thankful for those of you in particular who have contributed via Patreon and via other means to this work. I think about you all the time. I'm able to do what I do because of your support. So thank you very much for that. And more books and publications coming out, and we're looking forward to a very exciting next 2 to 3 years in this area. Thank you. And without further ado, we will move on to my interview last night with Ibn Warraq. I'm here with Ibn Warraq. You've been, I've been known each other for a while.
Yes, I think you just reminded me this evening that we met just over 10 years ago. No?
Something like that. Yeah, we were at a conference together. The first time I met you was at a conference in at Notre Dame. A conference on the Quran. I believe it was 2000. It might have been 2007 or 2008. I don't recall right now, but of course it was exciting to realize.
Who else who was speaking? Yeah, then it must have been 2000.
Yeah. Andrew Rippon was there, Gabriel Reynolds, it was 2008. Yeah, probably that was.
So, yeah.
So we've spoken a lot since then, and had occasion to meet in Europe as well as here at the house. So it's great to have you here again.
Thank you.
I want to take some time just to talk in a general way about your life. First of all, about some of your life and experiences. You've had quite an interesting run of things in your life. You're well known for your having left Islam, because you wrote the book Why I'm Not a Muslim, about your reasons for not being a Muslim. Can you tell our viewers something about your life and your trajectory?
Actually, when the Chinese want to put a curse on you, they say, "May you lead an interesting life." So I'm not sure. So leading an interesting life is such a blessing after all. I could have done with a little bit, with that being a little bit less interesting. Anyway, the one thing actually I do not talk about in my book, Why I'm Not a Muslim, is why I'm not a Muslim. I just went through some of the sources of the Quran, of the religion, and cast a very skeptical eye on the whole narrative. I don't talk about my personal life whatsoever in that book. I do try to. Since then, I've tried to speak a little bit more about my own development and so on. I wrote an essay which appeared in the very first issue of the conservative journal Standpoint. My article was called On Becoming English, and there I talk about arriving in England for the first time in 1956 at the age of 9.5 with my brother, and my consequent my further acquiring of very English characteristics, which remain with me have remained with me ever since. I also talk a little bit about the way the way I lost my Muslimness, my character, if I had any my Pakistani characteristics or character, but I didn't. I had no road to Damascus experience. I only very gradually shed any beliefs I had along the way, and at some point I remember when I was 13, 14, discussing religion with friends, and I was clearly not a Muslim even by the age of 14, 15. And then I had a kind of crisis of identity rather than faith in about the year 18, when I was about 19, I think. I was crossing over from Europe. I had won a travel scholarship to study art and architecture in southwest France. As I was crossing back into England, I had problems at customs, and they questioned me. They questioned the validity of my passport, which was Pakistani at the time, and it was so unpleasant, and I felt I was so fed up with being questioned in this way. It made me doubt my own identity, and I wondered what my identity really was. So when I went up to Edinburgh University, I studied Arabic and the Islamic religion in general. I'm not sure it settled anything. If anything, it confirmed me in my worst fears about the religion. I wrote my first version of my book, Why I'm Not a Muslim, in 1992, when a secular humanist magazine called Free Inquiry asked me for an article. They had been running a series of articles with the title, Why I Am Not and blank, and then you fill in the blank, why I'm not a Mormon, why I'm not a Episcopalian or whatever. And they couldn't find anyone to do one on Islam. Why I'm not a Muslim. But so I wrote it, and then I asked the founder of this secular humanist sort of think tank Dr. Paul Kurtz, who was a professor of philosophy at the State University of New York at Buffalo. He'd also founded the publishing house Prometheus Books. And I wondered whether he wanted a book-length version of this article. And he jumped at the idea and he signed me up very quickly. I remember going up to Paris to meet him. He was in Paris for a meeting with the International Humanist Organization. And he said, yeah, sure, we'll sign you up, we'll send you a contract. And that's how I wrote my first book, Why I'm Not a Muslim. It finally came out, for rather delayed. It came out in 1995. And then I was teaching at the time. I was almost 50, I guess, and I announced one evening at dinner to my family that I had written this book. They were rather surprised. They had no idea I was writing a book. And to this day, incidentally, my brother doesn't know I've written anything. So,
Wow.
It's a bit of a hide and seek, game of hide and seek with my family, I guess.
Yes.
And then I carried on. I edited 2, maybe 3 other books. One on the origins of the Quran, one on the historical Muhammad, and one on the what is it called? What the Quran really says.
Yes. We have these books over here, but I'm going to put them up on the screen in the edit of this video, so that,
Right.
as you mentioned them, yeah.
And then I actually, then 9/11 happened. Unfortunately, 2 years later, my wife died in 2003, and I couldn't bear to stay in France, really, and I went to work for Dr. Paul Kurtz in 2004, November 2004, just when the elections were in progress in November 2004. The result being, of course, Obama winning the elections. And then when I was there, I wrote further books on I wrote one on Edward Said. I wrote a couple of others, and then I moved on from the Center for Inquiry. The secular humanists were a very naive bunch. Really, unlike them, I had been mugged by reality. So I went to work for a think tank in Washington D.C. And there I wrote another book of defending the West. And I've continued ever since writing and researching on Western civilization, on Islam, on the Islamic component in Islamic terrorism, and so on. That's my life in short.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's and it is interesting that you touch on some themes, of course, outside of at one point, maybe it's been a couple of years now, but you did mention to me that you had almost grown. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you'll know what I'm saying. That you had grown tired almost of the Islam subject a little bit, and does that ring a bell for you? Or
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I was. It's such a joyless religion. It's I mean, I'd much rather be reading English literature, Dickens and Conrad and others. Why waste one time on this ghastly ideology which they call religion, but in a sense I was forced to continue in it because of world events, really, and people were asking me, urging me to do even more on this line, on these lines, but I'm trying to get away from, still trying to get away
Yeah.
from Islam. I think I will perhaps in my retirement, I'm going to be leaving New York, and perhaps I will take that opportunity to explore other things to write, perhaps some fiction, perhaps more general things on Western civilization, perhaps American civilization as well. Thinking of doing a dictionary of American culture, the enormous ignorance of a lot of people about American popular culture, about even in the world of sports, cinema, literature, and so on. I mean, if you don't know who Willie Mays is, you can look it up, look him up in my encyclopedia of American culture. If you don't know where the lines from the movie Casablanca, you can look them up in my book. Mm-hmm. If you don't know what the Yellow Brick Road is, you can look it up in my book. So that's well, I'm hoping to work on things like that.
Okay. I mean, beyond the Islam topic, but also not completely unrelated, you've written a lot on the, what for want of a better term, actually I don't think it's a bad term, was coined the Clash of Civilizations. Did you ever meet Samuel Huntington?
I did. I liked it a lot.
Yeah.
He was right.
And this kind of reflects back a little bit, of course, where we are now with the cancel culture and political correctness and all these things which are felt throughout our culture, but certainly also in my field of Islamic studies, which you and I have shared to a certain extent. But it touches on a very deep issue of two different cultures. Two things I want to just ask you about. Number one, when I hear of Huntington's theory, I've sometimes he's often been criticized for that. But I do see a reflection in that of something that's not original to him, and something that perhaps was first theorized in that way by Muhammad himself, at least as he is historically reported, of the Dar al-Islam and Dar al-Harb. But going back to your first experience when they could not find somebody to write the Why I Am Not a Muslim book, I see in that almost a beginning of, or a reflection of some of the core issues here that you've been fighting with in a much broader sense. If you know what I'm saying, why do you think they couldn't find somebody to write Why I'm Not a Muslim when they were easily able to find somebody to write those other books?
Well, the kind of people who were attracted to the secular humanists tended to be non-Muslims mainly. The Muslims would never consider at that stage. There were not many who would actually question their faith. They would consider it not only on an intellectual level, find it impossible, but there may have been some who doubted the veracity of the traditional narrative, but for an Arab to renounce his religion would mean renouncing his culture, which he could not do in public.
Yeah.
Whether it's the culture, the history was true or not,
it's bound together.
Right.
Yeah.
They couldn't separate the two, and it was a culture of shame and honor, and I remember Taslima Nasreen, the Bangladeshi dissident, who had to leave her own country because she was attacked by Islamic fundamentalists. She barely escaped with her life.
Mm-hmm.
Twice she escaped from there. She said to me she was giving a lecture on why she rejected Islam and so on. And after the lecture, an Arab came up to her and said, "Look, what you were saying about Islam is correct, but don't you ever criticize Islam in public again."
Mm-hmm.
And he threatened her.
Yeah, it's airing the dirty laundry, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly. That
Yeah.
was just not possible.
Yeah. Which is really a point of difference between what we call Western culture and perhaps Eastern.
Yes, he says
It's not unique to Islam necessarily,
Right.
right?
Sorry.
It's not unique entirely to Islam because other Eastern cultures have this sense of the honor and shame dynamic versus the perhaps the truth versus falsehood way of viewing the world.
I don't know. It's such a strong sense of shame and honor. I suppose traditional Japanese culture had that notion. Yes.
Not necessarily with respect to religious belief, but in a larger sense
Yeah.
of there are certain things that you would keep to yourself, particularly protecting your family.
Yeah.
Japanese culture certainly, and in India and other places, not necessarily only among Muslims in India, but among Indians in general. Perhaps other parts of Asia and perhaps other parts of the world, but that's maybe a little bit afield from our topic. You and I come from, at least, actually, I don't know entirely where your trajectory has led you. I know it, but you are well known as being an atheist or a secular humanist. Would you call yourself a secular humanist or?
No, I think of myself really as a agnostic, certainly secularist, but a secular humanist puts me with a group of people who I'm not in agreement with. They're incredibly naive, and they focus entirely on Christianity. And now occasionally I see Christianity is a good bulwark against the encroachment of Islam, and so I'm not happy with the. I left their circle of ideas quite a while back, and so I'm sort of still a kind of free thinker in the real sense of the word. I'm not attached to any particular ideology, certainly. But for somebody who's essentially a secularist, what becomes really important is truth. Truth is not in fashion these days, in these postmodern days.
Seems to be true. You can't even make a statement like that and have it be uncontested without asserting that there is truth to that statement, right?
Yeah. So I what fascinates me is I still wonder what really happened. Again, it's not a subject even historians care much about these days. I should like to really know what happened at the so-called birth of Islam, or birth of Christianity, for that matter, or Judaism. The so-called Abrahamic religions that we were talking about.
Yes. Well, we were talking even a little bit earlier today about the different premises that some of our colleagues take, and by the way, of course, you and I are both friends with people who have take a wide variety of approaches, including believing Muslims and other people who have, and others in academia who just have different starting points, and there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, but it is really important, I think, as we were discussing, to understand that the premises that you accept without question or without too much questioning really do affect where you go from there and how your entire way of looking at the subject or the world takes shape. And I think that's very true. And so you've taken a more skeptical approach, as I to a certain extent. And of course, what we just talked about, obviously I'm a believing Christian and so forth, so there are some things that, and yet in these things we share actually a lot in this world, particularly in the questions about free inquiry and the importance of that, because without free inquiry, without free speech and freedom to think, you just don't have, you don't have even the ability to think if you don't have
exactly
the room to move in that way.
Right.
I wanted to just wind up by asking you a little bit, it's related in some ways, but we were also talking about your trajectory from having been in your younger years, very much probably on the left, at least the American political spectrum. You wrote the book, Why the West is Best and so forth, and a lot of people on the left today, at least the way that it is manifested in 2021, would take issue with the claim that the West is the best. And behind that, obviously, is a way of viewing the world. What led you from, what was it that attracted you to what we might call the left back then, and what has changed since then?
There's a famous quote, I can never remember who said it, some famous European diplomat like Talleyrand, Metternich, or I don't know who it was, Bismarck, who said that to be not on the left when you're young shows you're heartless, and to be on the left when you're a mature adult shows you're mindless.
Yeah. I've seen a version of that attributed to Winston Churchill, I think, before, but I don't know
who it was.
I don't know who said it originally. I don't know.
Anyway, but so basically, one you just have to look at the objective facts, and then you realize that the question of slavery, for example, it's always blamed on only the West, only America, for that matter. Whereas, of course, slavery was present in every single culture, and the Arabs added this dimension of castration, which is not there in the Western slavery, and far more, of course, perhaps as many as 1 million castrated Africans died because there was no anesthetics applied, and
and that continued until very recently, even. Perhaps in some places still does.
Yes, poor slaves were brutally mutilated without any anesthetics, and this is true of every other culture as well. But at least the West, were the first to, I think, probably the first to stop it, to ban it. In fact, when the Victorians banned slavery, the African chiefs sent several delegates to Queen Victoria, saying, "How can you ban slavery? Because how will we live? This is our main means of support."
Yeah, it was damaging.
So it was the black princes, the black kings, who benefited the most from this, which is again forgotten conveniently. One of the redemptive graces of Western civilization is this. It's what I call self-criticism, which is amazingly rare for various reasons I mentioned already, like notions of shame and honor. Western civilization has always been ready to criticize its own foibles, its own weaknesses, I mean, people were criticizing institution of slavery. It's Dr. Samuel Johnson, and he, in the life of Johnson, talks about what a ghastly trade it was and why it should be abolished. This is the 18th century, you know.
Yeah.
This is, and he liberated, freed one of his slaves, and so on. Anyway, this is the same with the rights of women. It's under Western civilization that women have flourished in the last 150 years. Sexual minorities is the same. It's you don't get homosexuals are thrown off the top of buildings in Iraq and Syria. This is not the case in the West. They have their rights sort of defended, and they can carry on their lifestyle and only in the West for the moment. Anyway.
Well, I think, immediately of the assertion in the Declaration of Independence
Right.
that all men, meaning all people, are created equal and endowed with certain unalienable rights. And so deriving from such a statement, such a base foundational commitment, is the things that you talk about.
Right.
And I think that's not to be taken for granted or made light of when you talk about the ability to self-criticize.
Yeah.
I see that turned in such a sinister way these days, and that self-criticism now is being used against
Yes.
to throw out the baby with the bathwater, so to
Right.
speak, whereas if we lose that base commitment to
Right.
such good principles, where are we left?
Yes, so self-criticism, as I mentioned in my book, Defending the West, a critique of Edward Said's Orientalism, that self-criticism can turn into its opposite, and it can turn into self-hatred.
Yeah.
And it poisons the whole society, whole culture, and leads to ghastly results, which we're now seeing.
Well, thank you for taking some time to talk about these things, and there's much, much more that we can talk about, and hopefully we will at some time. Yeah, half an hour on that. That's
Okay.
good. Okay.